I was really trying to before this interview or discussion yesterday. I was really trying to iron out. I mean, as we sort of push on into the Pharaoh and Troy, as you mentioned briefly, I was like really trying to iron out why I didn't like it. And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, there's loads of reasons, but I think if we're going to look at it sort of from a top-down perspective rather than individual things, I think it was the fact that um, the infantry didn't really have the same weight as Rome 1, as medieval, as Empire, Napoleon, even Three Kingdoms, you could say.
Yeah.
No, well, not Three Kingdoms. Well, I don't know. I haven't really played that too much, but Thrones of Britannia, absolutely. Um, I kind of felt that um, they really didn't nail it because the infantry combat, not because of the game in the battle, but because you felt like you were recruiting infantry not to fight each other. You were kind of recruiting. Sounds weird, but you were kind of recruiting infantry just for one job, and that was to hold the line or to be your meat shield,
Yeah.
right? And so you lost the dynamics of infantry combat because the only job you'd have for your infantry is hold the line as long as possible and let your other more dynamic units, whether it was chariots, missiles, or some cavalry later on with the Dynasties expansion, which was good, by the way.
Mhm.
I think. I think you probably agree with me on that. From what you've put out, I think it was better at least than the Pharaoh
Yeah.
initially. Um, but no, my point is that I think I really didn't like the game because any infantry I recruit technically could do the same job if it was a defensive formation. It could
Mhm.
hold the line. I'd let my other units go around the flank and destroy it from the enemy army from the sides.
Yeah.
I felt that it's a little bit like Warhammer because, in the same way, I've never actually, to be honest, played Warhammer because I've not been interested, not necessarily because I've not liked certain aspects of it, just because I've never been interested, and so I've never played it. But it kind of felt like I've watched a lot of content on it, and it kind of felt like the same thing with Warhammer. Instead of having infantry fight it out, you had you were instead given the option to destroy infantry very, very easily with your magic abilities, right? And so infantry combat basically became, or has basically become an empire, Warhammer. So many games. uh, in Warhammer, a little bit like you're holding your front line, and yet you've got these huge magic spells, which are basically giving you the ability to destroy huge concentrations of men at one point, right? You've got
Mhm.
your, name a couple. I think one of the major ones is Winds of Death that the vampires can use.
Mhm.
And you kind of like, it looks awesome and it sweeps down the whole line and destroys loads of men. And there's other these area of effect spells and things like that you can use.
Yeah.
But the whole point of those spells isn't to, I wouldn't even say it was to tactically increase the game into another level. It's to sort of destroy things as awesomely as possible, and that
Yeah.
kind of works well in some respects because it's more of a graphically amazing game. I think Warhammer looks amazing, and I
Mhm.
think you can like the game or not and still think it looks amazing. Um, but when you give the player so much power in spells, I think you lose that infantry combat, and so factions like, and at least initially before this recent patch or a couple of patches, the greenskins, which were very, very infantry focused,
Mhm.
kind of were like on the back foot because they weren't really given uh, enough extra units to combat the enemy and still have a strong infantry line because infantry are basically meat shields.
Yeah.
And so with Pharaoh, you kind of have the interestingly same thing, except you don't have your cool magic spells.
Mhm.
And so what you're left with is instead of being able to destroy all this enemy infantry, which is kind of bogging you down, you kind of have to use other things, which aren't as cool. Like you don't really have that many. I mean, chariots are
Options.
cool, but after a while, what are you doing? Same tactics over and over again. The same after every battle, I use exactly the same tactics because the only ones that will work. You
Yeah.
hold your infantry and you use your chariots to go on the flanks
Yeah.
or missiles or whatever. I just felt that the infantry weren't it was sort of the same as formula as Warhammer. You weren't really given the punching power. I mean, some factions did, but even then, they'd just basically be holding the line. And so that's why I was kind of trying to pinpoint exactly where I didn't find very interesting enough for me to play anymore. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's where I'm sort of at with Pharaoh at the moment. So I'm interested to hear what you think.
I get it.
Yeah.
No, I think that uh, one of the biggest issues that Total War has developed over the years is there are certain mechanics that a few games before, a decade ago, you didn't really take for granted. That they were pretty important. One of them, for example, and I think is related to what we're talking about here, is replenishment. Especially in modern games, it's basically like this to replenish something.
Yes.
Obviously you can have certain factors that grow, develop, or that can stop that from happening if it's attrition, desert attrition, or certain circumstances that might slow it down. But you got the opposite. You can have things that you can use to increase it and make it even faster. And it's one of those things that you have to counterbalance with what you're describing. So if you're playing in Warhammer 3, it's the massive amounts of magic damage and the huge powerful units that demolish everything. But within a turn or two, you can get that army back up and going. If you've got certain mechanics going, and even default, like you can really get it going. I think Pharaoh does that a lot as well. There's a huge amount you can do to make replenishment like super easy.
Yes.
And like you said, it's like and that kind of affects how everything else feels as well. Battles don't feel as important because you just auto resolve this and replenish them within a couple turns. You recruit units and they don't feel like units. They just feel like an army you feel like you have to throw at something.
Right. Yeah.
It's not even meat shield infantry anymore for me. It's meat shield entire armies on a campaign map, and you're just
Fair enough.
and see what happens. And I think that happens a lot. I think it's just become. I think the way you feel about Rome 2 being and then DEI being like still too easy, despite how well it does. I think that's what it is. It's these kinds of mechanics being quite you don't have to think about them very much, which just makes it very, very simple to play, and it brings the focus a lot more towards what you're describing, the kind of spectacle of throwing a huge, beautiful, massive impact magic attack that is amazing. You've got a toolbox of magic attacks that you just you'll use this one this time, the direction of the series has kind of gone in that way, and there are pros to it. There are definitely things that make it interesting, and I think a lot of people do enjoy that a lot. I mean, I think that's why, for example, a lot of interesting mods and big mods recently over the last few years have been about reskins. You look at huge HD remaster reskins of Rome 2 that turn units into beautiful looking legions with custom made shields and all of that, and you're zooming in to look at these battles and they're absolutely beautiful. It has nothing to do with the gameplay, but you've got these what you want to feel like are truly historical and gorgeous looking infantry just like fighting each other in a battlefield, and it just looks amazing because it's trying to fill that void of you not having to think about how to play and what you need to do, the 3 steps forward of the tactics and strategy that older Total Wars I think did a lot better. Basically, it's kind of filling that
absolutely
that need.
I mean, there's so much to talk about. I mean, just the infantry, what you mentioned there. I think Rome 2 stuff. I mean, the reason why I said it's easy, not necessarily easy. Maybe I should rephrase that a little bit. DI is definitely a lot harder than the original Villaina.
Sure.
I should probably clarify that before I get. DI is really hard.
It is hard, but you can't there's a certain level of the core gameplay that you can't really change. That still makes it quite sort of
exactly. I was just about to say, you're sort of like sticking a patch on things rather than changing the underlying core gameplay. For example, they've changed the population from a progress bar with a number 1 to 10, I think it is, or 1 to 5, to an actual population count. But it still doesn't have, it's still technically the same thing, yet different number. And so, yes, you have certain units that you can't recruit so many of because their sect of the population is down, like the plebeians. I can't remember the other two, but You can't recruit so many elite units. I think
Yeah.
that's good. That's a fascinating. That's a great thing. But it still suffers from the fact that underlying it, the foundations of the game was still, you can build doom stacks really quickly, basically in Rome 2, and that's not historically accurate at all.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, one of the craziest things I think is that in Rome 1, unit collision is so much better than in any Rome 2 battle I've ever played. But also, units do things that you aren't even aware of in Rome 1. For example, if you march 2 units sort of parallel to each other, most of the time, unless you're in combat, I think is the only exception, maybe one of the only exceptions. One of the units, instead of going through each other like this, they'll stop without you ordering it, let the other unit pass, and then they'll carry on. It's really interesting, and you don't have to
Right.
input that at all. In Rome 2, there's nothing like that. This goes walking straight into each other. Another thing with Rome 1, if a unit does have to pass to another unit, they'll, without you inputting anything, the soldiers will go into double rank and allow these sort of like passageways through the unit. And that unit can pass through a lot more efficiently. It doesn't always work because it's an old game. Sometimes it looks a little weird, but there's stuff in that game that they still haven't ever brought back. Like even Rome 2, I mean, Rome 2 feels, it feels like it's too lightweight. Sort of when you're throwing units at things, they don't really do anything. Like in Rome, if, for example, in Rome 1, I could have a unit of Hastati hold my line against a legionary cohort for a significant amount of time. With Rome 2, if I put a unit of Hastati against a legionary cohort, it will lose in less than 30 seconds. It's sort of, it doesn't really have that same weight. I think Rome 1 encapsulates the fact that battles took a lot longer, casualties weren't as high as actually even Rome 1 demonstrates. Sides would face off and then they would draw and then they'd fight again and face off. Even in phalanx warfare, there wasn't as high casualties as in Rome 1 portrays. It was more of a pushing fight and then one side would break. And so I think Rome 1 got that right in that units felt heavy. Rome 2, it just feels like I'm dragging nothing. Like sort of I'm throwing a feather. It doesn't really feel like anything. And so
I
again,
get it.
they were kind of losing their infantry combat, weren't they? From Shogun 2 was so good with the everything could fight everything sort of feel to Rome 2 being, it was almost like a flimsy construction. Really, really was. But I think with Pharaoh, like you mentioned, I haven't played Pharaoh since this one event that happened to me. And it kind of just took me out that whole game, and I kind of haven't touched it since. And it was in the Dynasties expansion as well. I didn't buy the original Pharaoh because I didn't think I'd enjoy it, and I bought a Dynasties because I thought that's kind of cool. I'll give him a fair Pharaoh. And I was playing Babylon. I think Babylon's a really interesting faction. I was playing them, and then I kind of had the option on the map to have the whole map exposed because I kind of wanted to see what the other factions at least look like without the fog of war, the clouds, or whatever. I love the art style, by the way, of the campaign map in Troy and Pharaoh. I think that the art style, when you zoom in and you've got I can't remember what it's called, but the different artwork instead of the sky, I think it's really, really cool. I think it really, really well.
Me too.
But I think I was declared war on by some random Aegean faction. And like 5 turns later, like 2 stacks of this random Aegean faction turned up on my doorstep in the middle of modern day Iraq, Iran. And it kind of took me out. I was like, wait a minute. Even Alexander couldn't do this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, even Alexander had to fight way through the entirety of Persia. Yet these random Aegean armies kept appearing on my doorstep like every turn. Another one would turn up. I'm just thinking, that just doesn't do it for me anymore. Why am I fighting Greeks in the middle of the desert? Like, it doesn't. What's going on? And maybe I had a setting wrong or something, but I've never played it since. Yeah,
I totally get that experience. I mean, I think these games are beautiful, and I think that I think even mechanically they're not that, like, the ideas are there, and I love these periods. I mean, I love a lot of different types of history, and I would say my favorite is probably medieval, then Rome, and then ancient history. I think those are absolutely beautiful, very interesting periods of history. And so when Pharaoh was announced, and then when Dynasties came out, and I had the same kind of experience with Troy, you get the feeling that all these things are there, but they're not quite working. They're just not.
Yeah,
They're it's surface, but how deep does any of it really go? And then you get something like what you described. You lift the fog of war, and someone's sending 2 stacks from Greece to Babylon, or like one of the
yeah,
things I
yeah,
really didn't like about Troy when I first played it. You're playing as Agamemnon, and you're doing your own thing, and then suddenly Priam's like, "Hey man, I'm just gonna invade you." Like 40 turns in, it's Troy invading Greece, and I was just like, no,
yeah.
what?
There's no reason for it, and you sort of feel like it's just a gameplay, to
Yeah,
make you keep playing. Yeah,
it's like Total War works if it's either purely sandbox or like Napoleon, it's following a very interesting narrative
mm,
that you can do yourself, and blah, blah, blah. But when it's trying to do a bit of sandbox and make it sort of forced on you, it
yeah,
completely removes the sort of immersion and commitment, I think, that I've had personally.
yeah. I mean, I think one of the weakest things about Troy, as well, you could say Troy, but I was going to say Pharaoh,
Yeah.
was the fact that we did not have that much historical um, evidence or historical documentation about the period.
Yeah.
And so I look at things like Agamemnon's roster, and you've got all these different Aegean units that look really cool, and they sound really cool. You've got these, I think some of them have dual axe wielding or dual sword wielding units,
Yeah.
and they theoretically could have been possible. But I always think this looks a little gimmicky. I very much doubt that there was a strong Aegean infantry unit that could, move in that kind of formation, that could fight that efficiently at that time. No way. There's no way that they all had the same armor. They all had the same. There was probably elite
Yeah.
groups of soldiers, a little bit like Achilles and a little bit like the Mycenaean troops. They were
Yeah.
probably good, but they weren't like, they weren't thousands of them that you could just throw at an enemy and completely destroy them. And I
Yeah.
think because the time period's so weak, because we only know a little bit about the Sea Peoples, we don't really know why the Bronze Age collapsed. Really, we have theories about it, but no one's really, we don't know why the Mycenaean, why it could have been climate
The
change, it could have been the
right.
barbarians, it could have been so many different factors, but we don't know why they suddenly collapsed completely. And I think that game does a good way of kind of letting you decide why that is.
Mhm.
But because the time period is so weak, we don't have that many descriptions of units like we did in Rome 1, for example, or in Rome 2, you could even say. We don't really have, so they had to kind of make it up themselves. And that almost makes it feel like, I don't know, I can't give you examples of units, I don't really know them. But all these different like elite units that they had, like I think it was like Heroes of Troy and things like that. It almost makes them feel a little bit fanciful. Fanciful? That's a wrong word, but fantasy-like.
Fantastical. Yeah.
They didn't really exist, but they put them in as the elite top tier unit, and it almost makes it feel like we're playing a retelling of what actually was like. Because if you dumb it down, I mean, kingdoms at the time, they'd have a little bit like, Thrones of Britannia. You'd have your
Mhm.
elite troops that you'd have that were your sort of your household troops that you
Yeah.
had all the time, and you pay them, and then you'd have your
Sure.
peasantry that you kind of call up and form your phalanxes in times of war. And they
Yeah.
kind of missed that. They kind of had everybody sort of piled into one army, and uh, it didn't really have the same weight as it did with Thrones of Britannia.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd say. And so you'd have these huge stacks of elite infantry that you just kind of wander around the map and destroy these. Sometimes the AI would throw me a 20 stack of just slingers. So it's just what's going on.
Yeah,
It's
no,
sort of it's so weird.
and it's
Yeah,
so easy. It's so easy to get to that point, especially in
yeah,
those games as
yeah,
well. I mean, and they I don't want to go. We could go on and
yeah.
on
We
about,
could.
but but like they had the resource system as well, which again was kind of like this. It's a cool, interesting mechanic, a different way of
Yeah, I
looking at
agree. It was a cool
economics
one.
and kingdom development and having that feed into whether you're building a building or recruiting a unit or doing diplomacy. Like, okay, that looks good on paper, and I like that they're trying it, but then you play it and I don't know how you feel, but like it just
Yeah,
kind of it starts losing its function very quickly. You start using
yeah,
one particular resource all the time, or you just start getting loads of them, loads of these resources very very quickly,
yes,
and obviously you can play in difficult, more difficult settings, but um, there's no like there's no like there's no choice. There's no like you do it this way or that way. There's you can play as a faction that can get loads of gold really quickly by using these
yeah,
buttons and mechanics. That's great, but then I can get all of this gold anyway really really quickly. So you're just doubling what you're normally, and it just kind of, and then like you said, you can get these elite units through gold and get loads of them and start
yeah,
doing doom stacks, and it's just it loses its function very very quickly. Yeah.
yeah. There's a couple of not call them exploits, but I'd say there were a couple of bad decisions with especially with the politics side of it. Like for example, I could petition. So I kind of like how I did the structure family, not family tree, but structure political system. I kind of like that. But I
Mhm.
could petition someone to give me elite units, top tier units in like turn
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
What's that? It's ridiculous. I could have like a whole
Or
stack of
or better
yeah,
yet, you could be in the Pharaoh's family and he dies. You become Pharaoh. And then you also appoint someone in your kind of general roster to become that guy who gets those elite units. So suddenly you're
yeah,
like it's you can just request them and they're in your roster. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
And it kind of felt like I was cheesing my way through the game because I just have to like do some political intrigue, and suddenly I could recruit 15, or no, not 15, but maybe 5 units of really good elite infantry for a really cheap price. And
Yeah.
I sort of I liked the resources because it kind of challenged me a little bit. Not playing Troy, I went to Pharaoh thinking didn't understand the trade system at all, and so I tried to do diplomacy initially. I was like, "Where's the trade button? Why can't I just send a trade deal? Where is it?" And I realized I
Right.
had to create my own trade deals, and I kind of like that, but then it kind of threw me off a little bit. I was playing Troy itself in um, the Dynasties, and I basically got the AI to send me a ton of resources and basically I used diplomacy as a little bit way of gathering resources. I'd send gold to this person, they give me more, whatever another resources. I can't remember what it is now.
Like food
Um,
or bronze or something.
yeah, yeah, and then I'd basically manipulate trade deals to get me more resources, and then I think halfway through the campaign, all my trade deals kind of fell through, and then I was left with nothing. So
Right.
there are good points to it, I think, and I kind of ended that campaign. I couldn't um, continue because all my armies are built on these trade deals, and so I kind of like that. But then also with a Babylon campaign, I kind of felt I was sort of doing a resource generating campaign. Like every
Mhm.
building I was trying to get the plus ×7 or ×5 increase to this resource. I was trying to get the different building chains to work, and I kind of felt like, it's not really doing it for me. That kind of style of it. Like if I'm not deliberately playing the game as a trading game with those kind of resources, if I've got all these buildings that are generating massive amounts of these resources, as you said, and I can
Yeah.
kind of recruit whatever I want and kind of manipulate the political system to give me top tier units, but it's kind of interesting. It kind of snowballs really early.
Yeah.
And so you've got this really powerful Babylon with only 10 regions that can now sweep across the whole map. And I'm just thinking, what's the point of playing this anymore? Because
Yeah.
I know that in 20 to 50 turns, I can conquer the whole of the Middle East pretty
Yeah.
much
And I
with
think
little to minimal effort. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I think a lot of factions are like that. I mean, you can play as the that Canaanite faction where you're raiding
Mm.
and pillaging and getting tons of resources from like various kind of traits that you kind of increase or abilities that you kind of click and suddenly like raiding income is 2x or 3x your normal resource generation. You just go from raiding one region to the next, making like 3,000-4,000
Yeah.
extra food, and then oh, you need a bit more, you just sack this city, and then yeah, and it's just like Yeah,
It's totally
I think
ahistorical. Yeah, it's
yeah.
terrible. Sorry, you go on. But
No,
yeah,
no, no. That's basically it. Yeah, I think like I said, these games do certain ideas on paper on the surface pretty
yeah,
interestingly, and it draws you in. Um, those that first campaign that I played on Pharaoh, and the first one again that I played in Dynasties, it draws you in. The first 50, 60 turns, I wanted to keep going. I wanted to get more
yeah,
of this resource. You find a way. Oh, I'm actually doing, I'm going to double down on gold, just produce gold, and then trade all of my gold for the rest of the resources, and just see how that goes. It doesn't matter who I'm trading with. I can just, and you figure out these different ways. But then after a while, you start realizing there's no point.
mhm,
There's a very quick snowballing, and all you're doing really is just clicking some buttons and getting the same numbers, and yeah,
yeah. I totally agree with you. I think if we're going to iron out something I would love to see in a new Total War game, whatever it's going to be, we could debate that, I'm sure. But um, something I'd love to see is, it kind of combats this problem where you sort of have the mid game and then the end game snowballing. Like, they have that problem, I think, and Warhammer they tried to introduce these end game events.
yeah,
Kind of doesn't work really very well. A lot of people have just like put them all on and then have a really big challenge at the end. It's kind of fun for the first game, and then it kind of gets boring.
yeah,
Um, but it's a big problem with snowballing, and I think the way to combat this, which I'd like to see, is them introducing some sort of supply system. And I can give you, I mean, I think all Total War games have this big problem where, as we talked about a little bit, where you can send out an army to anywhere on the map pretty much and conquer something and have no consequence of sending how far that army is from your initial territory. I think it's so weird to have that because, I mean, I'll just give you an example from Napoleonic warfare. Napoleon invades Russia, and we always think he got to Moscow, and it was terrible all the way through. I mean, half his army pretty much deserted before he even got to Moscow because of supply problems. But he had this really intricate supply system that the Russians were kept pressing, and it was huge, this supply system. But he got to Moscow, and he kind of waited for the Russian surrender that didn't come, and he turned around to come back again. And instead of marching along the same route he went back initially, he tried to go a different way. And the reason for that was not because it was easier, it was actually harder, but because he'd already pillaged all the way through the Russian territory. And so he wanted a way back
right,
that he could actually survive, his army could, forage on.
yeah,
But the Russians blocked him. And he had to go back on himself all the way up to Moscow, if I'm doing a little bit of a weird diagram with my hand here, and back down his initial route.
yeah,
And that was what really stumped him, because instead of having the countryside to kind of pillage as he went back through Russia to France, he had to go back through a route he'd already gone through. And so his army basically starved to death. There's nothing like that in Total War. Like there's no supply routes. You can't. I mean, imagine if you were being invaded by a huge barbarian army, right? And instead of having to fight them because you couldn't beat them, you send out smaller parties, cut off their supply lines. They have to retreat. They can't unless they siege you down or whatever, or beat you in battle. If they're sieging your capital, and it's say 10 turns, but they can't assault for whatever reason because your walls are too high or whatever. They have to retreat because their supplies are dwindling fast, and they're going to lose cohesion. They're going to lose their army. It's a common thing in history to see, and even the Romans had this problem. If they didn't have a supply, Napoleon himself was constantly doing these elaborate maneuvers, not necessarily to fight battles, but to cut supply of his enemies,
mhm,
cut communications. I mean, the initial, I think, third coalition or fourth coalition campaign, when Napoleon does this sweeping maneuver at Ulm and manages to surround these 50,000 Austrians and they surrender. The reason he does that and he's able to do it is because the Russian army that was supposed to be reinforcing them had a different calendar to the Austrians, and so they were months behind. Not because they were trying to be, but because they had a different time system. And you think it's so
right,
weird. So coordination is a huge problem, and it's
yeah,
not really represented in Total War. And I think if they can, if I mean, it makes it a little bit more like a paradox game, a little bit. But I think if they focus on it enough, you wouldn't have this snowballing effect because you'd have to make sure your supplies were, capable of supporting these huge stacks. And if they weren't, and the AI was clever enough, it could send units behind or armies behind and cut your supply lines. It's like when the Romans would invade Britain, for example, they would do it at such a slow pace because they would be constantly building, sort of Romanizing the behind them. They build forts, they build roads, and all that was to allow them to have a constant supply line. And if that was cut, their legions would basically be at the mercy of the barbarians because they have no food. I mean, Teutoburg Forest is a great example. They get cut off in the middle of this forest trying to take a shortcut home. They get cut off from their supplies. They get cut off from communication, and this like really elite Roman force gets decimated by pretty incapable barbarians. If on a normal fight, a one-on-one fight, that Roman legion would have wiped the floor with them, and yet they get cut off, and communication and discipline just falls through the floor, and it isn't represented in Total War. I think that's fascinating because it's such a decisive factor. And so, if in a game like Medieval 3 and Empire 2, I would love to see that. I'd love to see them try and implement some sort of system. They've done it before with attrition, but it's not really the same thing. Attrition doesn't really affect you. You can just replenish immediately, like you've already mentioned.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it'd be difficult to implement, I think. But if they could do it, I think it would stop this late game build up of these huge doom stacks that you'd have. I think you'd have to be a lot more careful with them because if you lost them, the AI could sweep you and snowball you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you could do, for example, is like DEI, the way it morphed the population bar into different types of populations. You could almost have CA do a similar kind of thing for movement points. So instead of having a bar represent how much the army can move, you can have a more in-depth, right, it needs these supplies to go a certain distance.
Yes.
We're kind of going into a paradox a little bit in terms of how these mechanics might work, but having that movement then be tied behind it or going into territory where it can pillage to keep those movement points growing, or and those supplies growing, not net negative but positive, and the consequences of that on the region from a public order or a production point of view, or there's so many ways you can tie, and you can make that single bar just more interesting and intricate with the rest of what's going on around it to develop.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That'd be really cool.
What do you think the next Total War game is going to be? Just sort of a fire question at you. What do you think? What's your hopes and dreams?
No, it's a good one. I mean, I've personally always wanted another Medieval 2. Really, I think, like, I'm guessing you're gonna say Empire 2, obviously.
Well, I don't know. I've kind of changed my mind, but go on, please.
Really? Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, Medieval 2. Out of all the games, I think that were new that I got into, that I played, and I was like wowed by, it was Medieval 2 for me. It was like original Medieval when it first came out. Medieval 1. Really blew my mind going from Shogun to that. And so when I knew Medieval 2 was coming out, and then it came out and I played it and the expansions, I was just like, this is everything I hoped it would be, and so it's been such a long time, and it's my favorite time period. I would love to see a Medieval 3. I think especially with the way CA has move forward a little bit recently in the last couple of years. Well, let's say year and a half, with communication and trying to listen and recognize what people are actually looking for, and within, you have to be kind of mindful of what sort of resources they're working with, and when the people that they have, and the commitment, it's things are so much more complicated than people really imagine and give them credit for.
Right.
So I think they're doing a lot of good, and they have done a lot more. That's positive and encouraging in the last year and a half. And I think whether it's Empire 2 or Medieval 3, I think there's still a chance that they might do something with it that's worth paying attention to. But yeah, I think Medieval 3 would be my pick of the two. What about you?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think I mentioned this briefly to you off call a couple of weeks ago, but um, I mean, Three Kingdoms was the last major historical they released. Pharaoh, you could say, was a Sophia project, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah,
the major historical team haven't released something for since Three Kingdoms, which is a long time ago.
yeah,
Um, so we are looking at a I mean, big release soon. I think by this end of this year, they've got to announce something. I think they'll leave it until after GTA 6 comes out. I don't think releasing it at the same time as GTA 6 is a good idea. I think there's this big um, void, I think, in the gaming industry of not wanting to release stuff around GTA 6 because it's kind of a huge game, isn't it?
yeah,
Um, so I think we'll see a end of year announcement, maybe a 2026 release. I don't know. Could be sooner. I have no idea.
yeah.
But I was going for an Empire 2. You're correct. Until I played KCD 2, actually, which is interesting. And I
Right.
kind of got a lot more into the medieval. I kind of got more into that. Sort of fell in love again a little bit more with the whole dynamics of the medieval age, especially the way that soldiers interacted with people. I think was interesting at the night. How knights were supposed to conduct themselves as to actually how they did, and
Hmm.
things like that. That KCD really kind of delves into, like um, kind of takes chivalry on. It kind of takes um, political decisions on really, really well. Um, and I didn't really think medieval had the depth. I mean, it sounds really silly to say this, but I didn't really think medieval period had the depth that a Rome had, that a Empire 2 could have had,
Right.
or maybe will have. Because, like, for example, with Germany, it's so fractured all the time that how can you have a consistent sort of kingdom? How can you have a consistent approach? And France is so fractured. I
Yeah.
don't really understand at the time how that would work, but now I can kind of see that maybe it's a little bit less of you owning a huge kingdom rather you owning a part of a kingdom, or you own uh, a, a different part of England. I don't know how they'd break it down. I mean, I'd be interested to hear because you probably know a lot bit more about medieval than I do. How you think they break it down? But I think, um, especially, I think if they just maybe they did a grand campaign, or maybe they focused on a specific part of medieval, like the Teutonic campaign, um, the Crusades, or the even really early on, you could have the Moor invasion of Spain. I think that hasn't really been touched at all. I think that'd be really, really cool.
Hmm.
100 Years' War. I mean, there's so many things in
Yeah.
medieval, but it's kind of separated over a long period of time. And my worry with Medieval 3 is that because it's so expansive, how can you narrate it? So,
Hmm.
because as a player, you're kind of trying to conquer things, right? And so if you conquer France as England, you can't have the 100 Years' War because you've technically already had it and you miss
Yeah.
out. So how can you narrate stuff like that? And that's why I think Medieval 2, 3 would have to be split up into these. I think they did it in Medieval 2, right? They split it up
Hmm.
into these micro campaigns, which I thought
Hmm.
really worked really, really well. And it kind of gives you that experience without having to kind of set it up yourself in the campaign, which would kind of feel weird.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'd be interested to see how you think it worked. I was going to go for Empire 2. I currently think they're going for Medieval 3 just because of the way. I mean, like, they didn't know KCT 2 was going to come out and do so well, but
Yeah. Of course.
my opinion is if they've done a Medieval 3, they're probably going, yes, that's really cool because everyone loves Medieval again.
Yeah. I mean,
But yeah,
I
interested to see
think
what you think.
I think you're totally right. I think that medieval has, just as an era, has become a bit more popular recently. There's KCD 2. I mean, I don't think a lot of people thought Manor Lords would sell that much either. I mean, it being an early access,
True.
and still a lot more to do there. But it is medieval. It's and people were very hyped about it, and they bought it, and a lot of people still play it. And yeah, there have been a lot more kind of medieval movies in the last few years that come to mind, and I think there's a lot of precedent for it. I think CA could do it. I mean, personally, I think that both Empire 2 and Medieval 3 can basically do what those original games did, Empire and Medieval 2, but take it basically all the way. I think those
Right.
games were like, let's do this period. We have tons of ideas that could do really well. We've got a whole, drawing board, but out of these 100 ideas, we really can only develop 10 or 15. And
Yeah.
all of them
Yeah.
would really physically fit the period. You can have a Medieval 2 with incredible feudalistic system depth, the political, like you can
Yeah.
have basically a sort of Three Kingdoms like system of different like characters, but you can turn those into tiny little municipalities and duchies and all of that, and have certain specific historical characters lead, like sort of in a paradox ish level of depth and detail with the Total War battles that we love, and have a lot more intricate weaved in kind of mechanical. You could have the Thrones of Britannia style recruitment of
Mhm.
bringing the peasantry up and training them for a war that's built, brewing and defending your lands, or fighting for whatever reason, and different reasons for war as well. Like there's so much, honestly, I
Yeah.
think you
I
can
agree.
do. And I think you can do just exactly the same for an Empire 2 as well. There's so much more they could have done with Empire, and arguably even more so than Medieval 2, really, because of how much more developed the economic world was becoming, and the like connectivity, the globalization of trade, the
Yeah.
intrigue, the development of societal and political change, revolutions, and yeah, there's so much you can do with all of this that just originally the games barely touched,
Yeah.
because of the nature of the time and technology and everything. So I think both games can be done really, really well. I think the
Yeah.
difference is going to be, yeah, what you enjoy. I think
Yeah.
the time period wise, the most at the moment. I'm kind of more Medieval 3. I think because of how amazing some of the mods have been coming out for it, as well as the big popular games and etc. that are coming out, KCD2 and everything. I mean, I love jumping back into Anno Domini 1051. It's a super recent mod, released in the last
Mm.
6 months, but it's interesting, completely converting Age of Charlemagne into a later period, and adding new siege maps and units and these different factions, the Normans and everything. It's really interesting, and then people are constantly creating mods like this, so there's a huge amount of appeal for it.
Mm.
So yeah, yeah,
What do you think about? I mean, do you think? I was just thinking as you were talking. We mentioned the resource system in Pharaoh. I mean, having that in Empire, it kind of did actually. For if you think
yeah,
about it, the trading of ivory, of tea, of coffee, you kind of had that initial
yeah,
concept. It could work a lot better in that kind of situation where you've got trade as sort of the second major factor after conquest and empire is trade. You've got to have trade, otherwise you will lose the game.
yeah, definitely.
Um,
And
so
kind
you
of
could
maybe
have,
maybe even
yeah,
tying that in with like the Medieval 2 companies that kind of spring up dynamically, and you're like,
true,
oh, why don't we do a thief guild here? You could do that in a sort of empire um fashion, where you've got a certain resource and you've got people wanting to build guilds and companies that grow them and you spread across different kingdoms and areas, etc. To, I don't know, like it's
it's
it's the kind
it's
of
quite a
it's
lot of
yeah,
sandboxy enough. Yeah, yeah,
all of this, I think it's the kind of thing where there are aspects of what the mechanics and the immersion and all of that can look like that we can't even imagine, like, I think, and yeah, we can keep talking about it and coming up with
yeah.
hundreds of ideas, I think.
Well, I think
um
as long as they get the core concepts right, I think they can kind of branch out into whatever they want to do
yeah,
with it. Core concepts being, um, well, I don't know what they are. That's another discussion,
true, true,
but splitting it in half, having the battles be a significant part of it, I think is important.
Yeah.
With Paradox, I've never really gone into Paradox just because I haven't had enough time to invest into it.
Mhm.
It's kind of a complex system I don't really understand. I probably could do it, but I just haven't got enough time. Um,
Yeah.
but I think the biggest thing I like about Total War over Paradox is the fact that even if the battle looks, I mean, like maybe you've played more Paradox, you can correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if in Paradox, if you don't have the right stats, if you don't have the right units, if you don't have the right composition, you will lose the auto-generated battle. I think, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
It's still
generally. I mean, you can have characters that kind of sway the balance a bit more if they're
right.
quite experienced. They've got certain, yeah, maybe they kind of give a lot more to the infantry side, even though the composition's off. Maybe the infantry are a lot more powerful because this guy has.
Okay.
Yeah, but generally, I would say if the composition off is off, you're gonna
Yeah.
lose it. Yeah.
What I'm trying to say maybe then is if the stats aren't correct, you won't win. I mean, technically you said that for Total War, technically.
Yeah.
But what Total War I think brings that Paradox can't bring is that you can go into a battle knowing you're going to lose and still win it because of things like
Yeah.
positioning, because of things like drawing your enemy and then surrounding them and creating a chain route. Things like
Yeah.
that you can't really achieve in Paradox. And I think that's the big strength of Total War, having the ability to do something that isn't feasibly possible, but still is because you as a player can outthink the AI, can outplay them. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, some people will cheese the system. You're always going to have ways to cheese the AI because
Yeah.
obviously it's an AI. But if their core concepts are you can use certain tactics, like for example, in Hastings when William the Conqueror, I think it's debated whether this was an actual tactic or if it was an actual route. He half his army sort of, or his left flank kind of pulled the Saxons off the ridge line, and then the
Mhm.
Norman cavalry was able to come around. That wasn't been
Right.
possible unless he used kind of like tactics to draw the enemy out and use real tactics
Yeah.
to kind of win the battle. And in the same way, I think if you can do that to AI, I think you won't have to cheese the game because there'll be lots of ways to defeat the AI and lots of ways the AI can defeat you
Mhm.
in battles that aren't just based on stats. And I think if they can crack that sort of little paradox, if you could say, if they can crack that, if Total War can crack that code, I think they've got a good core concept to base anything on, an Empire, medieval more so. But because Empire is more linear line warfare, but
Yeah.
medieval kind of gives you that more, I'd say a little bit more sandboxy feel, because you've got things like, for example, the Battle of Hattin, where Crusaders were incredibly powerful, and then they kind of over committed to attacking and got caught out in the middle of a desert and then got slaughtered by I think it was, I'm
Mhm.
not sure if it was Saladin or another general, but they lost a huge army because of their
Mhm.
incompetence, not because that army was bad. But if that was a Paradox game, you would fight the army, and the Crusaders technically, I suppose, would win because they had better stats.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure which faction they were facing or which country, or I don't want to misrepresent them, but they were defeated because they were exhausted, tired, out of supply.
Mhm.
They were in the middle of a desert wearing, chainmail, and you had an enemy that was quick-footed, could shoot them to death. A little bit, again, what happened to Crassus in Rome, and kind of just tore them apart, and communication broke down. And you had this immensely powerful force uh, destroyed by a weaker one, but using better tactics. And I think if they can crack that for Total War and have a great campaign with some, historical characters on the side as well that boost stats, that do things, that's not necessarily a historical thing. I think people think, oh, having a war cry ability or having a thing is a bad thing. I don't necessarily think it is. I think it depends on how you use it. If it's magic, no. But if it's like an awe of influence, I think that's okay because you have historical evidence of this being present. Again, Napoleonic warfare when he's in Italy, Napoleon's in Italy, he leads a charge or inspires a charge across a bridge
Mhm.
and defeats the Austrians. And there's no way that would have happened unless he brought those troops to the point where they were willing to go across. And I think that's
Mhm.
using influence. That's using, and what is that translated into Total War? That's, you could say, your general has the ability to inspire troops to advance into enemy
Yeah.
fire that will probably kill them. technically that's a stat increase if you try
Yeah.
to translate that
Yeah,
you could
definitely.
probably use as a button, right?
Yeah.
And so there isn't people like shy away from that. I don't necessarily think it's bad in all circumstances. I think it can be bad. Like, for example, Rome 2 didn't do it very well with the war cry ability. I think Rome
Mhm.
1 did a lot better. You kind of had to wait for your troops to get into the war cry state and then charge them. In Rome 2, you could just
Yeah.
push a button and suddenly they'd be more active. I think that's
Yeah,
a little bit dumb,
exactly.
but
Yeah.
that's not a great way of implementing it. Like, you could wedge formation and kind of the gimmicky, you'd have more defense stat and whatever. But, you know, there are bad examples, but there are also some really good examples as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if they can have that fundamental, I think Empire 2, Napoleon, whatever game, I think if you can do things that undermine the AI's capability, undermine the fact that they might be more powerful than you and still win, I think you've got a great Total War game. So
Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of like uh whether it's on the battles or the campaign, but you know, the battles are just as important.
mhm.
If you have a way to win against the odds, then you've got something that's working,
Yeah,
basically.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I agree
Yeah,
with
I
that.
think
Yeah, I think a lot of what for me feels wrong with more modern ones is you don't get a lot of that. You know,
no.
you can take a lot of that for granted and take advantage of the AI when it's clearly not making use of some of those mechanics and is just tactically unaware of what you can do around them, basically,
Mhm.
especially in the battles. You
And
know.
you could say that Magic in the Total War Warhammer series is a way of doing that.
Yeah.
Is a way of fighting against a stronger opponent. If you have a stronger wizard or magician or whatever you have, you
Hmm.
could say you're using the capabilities to destroy a stronger opponent. But so technically, you could say that's a way of working it. Maybe that is a good part of the Total Warhammer series.
Hmm.
But I think it is evident, especially in that game. Maybe not to change the subject or anything, but I think it's evident, isn't it, that um, the most played faction in Total Warhammer 3, 2, or 1, I think is, if you correct me if I'm wrong,
Empire.
with the
Yeah.
Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why? I think and it's important to think, why is that? It's not any of the fantasy factions. I'm not sure what the second one is, but I know the elves are up there. I
Yeah.
know that dwarves are up there somewhere, and maybe
Hmm.
the vampires as well. But it's always the humanoid factions that are always up at the top. And I think even in fantasy, people want to have that experience where they're fighting as the human faction against the odds. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
Against the waves of different types of enemies, whether it's lizard men, whether it's I don't know what other ones like dark elves or
Or ogres or something.
whatever. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could be anything. But they want to have, can the humans survive against the fantasy elements of this campaign? I think that's the big draw. And
Yeah.
yes, and after that, after you've done that, you can go into all the different fantasy ones and you use the different spells and different things. But I think the big draw to Warhammer, and it shows in the stats, is can they do that? And so that even with the fantasy, you could say the community is split between fantasy and historical. I'm not so sure that it is as much as people think. I mean, I think
Hmm.
a lot of historical players play Warhammer 3 because it's the best, not the best, the most
Kind
recent
of recent. Yeah.
game. But they
Hmm.
play the Empire because the Empire is um, the most
Kind of
historically
like
similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think
Um,
you're right. I mean, the kind of like divide that I think about is for very vocal historical players. It's going from a mainly historical focused development sort of strategy for games in the series to more, let's do a lot of the Warhammer and the success of the Warhammer kind of feeding into how maybe other historicals in the series that they're making kind of are influenced by them mechanically or visually or etc. But I think you're totally right. I mean, I think there are something like 30,000 people still playing the historical games. And I guarantee there's a large overlap of people
mm.
who
Oh,
also,
yeah.
among those people, play the Warhammer games, who play Troy, Pharaoh, and Three Kingdoms. Um, yeah, I think that it's just We'll see. We'll see where it goes, but like everything has its pros and cons, you know,
Mhm.
and everything has its you enjoy it for one reason, and there are other reasons that you don't enjoy it for, and maybe you'll forgive some of those and not forgive others, and CA will always go through, I think, ups and downs of catering and listening and fixing and not fixing and taking advantage and doing this and that. I think, you know, there's no reason to think any of that will really change. But you can, you know, if you're invested enough, you know, you can hope and be you know, looking out for a next historical that is a bit truer
Mhm.
to maybe what the originals were about, and CA pivoting to making use of some of those positives that made the games over time feel more appealing, more immersive, more you being involved in decision making that has an impact, and really choices that you can feel the consequences of turns ahead of, you know, that
Mhm.
choice. and
Mhm.
and yeah, I think
Yeah.
you know, the conversation has revolved around Medieval 3 and Empire 2 because that's what is most vocally
People want.
requested. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's what a
That's what
lot of
people
people
want,
are
man.
looking for. Yeah.
It's a
Um,
it's a win for them. I think if they did that. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I'm going to kind of draw the
Sure.
conversation a little bit to a close here. And we've been doing this for almost 2 hours, I think, which is
Oh,
crazy.
that's awesome. I
I
didn't even
think
know.
this, I didn't notice either. I think this is the longest I've done. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for being here.
Sweet.
As as a final question
Okay.
before we end here, because we haven't really talked a lot about the modding scene, and we've talked a little bit about
Sure.
RTR, Imperium Spectrum, DEI, what and FCN, because I know you're working with Dan
Yeah.
a lot on that as well. What at the moment would you say is your favorite mod that you've played?
Um, I think for definitely for the ancient history, it's definitely Rome 2, RTR.
RTR, yeah.
I think it's just so expansive and so historic. I mean, it really goes for the niche of historical. Doesn't try and bend anywhere really. Apart, I
Yeah.
mean, you could say that the three Roman factions are technically ahistorical, but I don't think they are. I think they are more historical in having one singular Rome.
Okay.
Um, but I think RTR is definitely there. I think FCN probably my favorite. I mean, a lot of people say NTW3.
Yeah.
I think that's a great mod as well. I think it's again a lot like RTR. It kind of goes really in depth into history, and so you have these really in depth battles where you know the the brand of your musket of that infantry unit or the type of musket can influence the
Yeah. Yeah.
engagement. The
Absolutely.
depth of your formation can influence the engagement. I
Mhm.
think that's interesting. But I also think that I think I prefer FCN just because it offers that a little bit bigger scale. I think and NTW3 is great, but it doesn't do well with because uh, it's more in depth. It doesn't do well with that bigger scale.
Mhm.
Um, like with SDN does. I think you can literally play 40 unit battles and have a 4v4.
Yeah.
Um, Dan was even showing me. I hope you don't spoil anything for him, but I know I'm not sure if it's his current FCN or if it's him working in the background. But he managed to get FCN to work with a 6v6, um,
I
6
think
AI
I
versus
think you
6.
did mention this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy if you think about it. I mean, like, how is that even possible? I don't know. He's a great coder or whatever, but
Yeah.
um, yeah. So I think I like the NTW3, and there's nothing wrong with the game at all, and I think it's fantastic. I think
Mhm.
the maps are incredible. I think the
Mhm.
way that they've made the points of interest matter, like supply lines, we can talk
Yeah.
about that actually. Having you have to win by having an exit route, and you can cut your enemy off. I think that's really really clever how they've managed to build that into the game. Really
Mhm.
really clever. But FCM for me, just I think it's a little bit more scalable. I think, and I like scale. I think I'd rather play a battle that's bigger because I kind of associate it more with how it really was.
Yeah.
Uh, and NCW3 is fantastic, but it's more of a smaller scale divisional engagement where you may have
Right.
a brigade engagement with no, sorry, other way around, but
Yeah, it's like
a
unit to
divisional
unit
engagement with
versus army to army, basically. On like
yeah,
the
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think FCN kind of deals with that a little bit better because it's less demanding on the system because
Mm,
it kind of makes it more about the macro rather than the micro. If you see
exactly.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying. And so I mean, I could play either one, but I personally have been getting into FCN quite a lot recently. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Sure,
Nice.
there are other mods out there I haven't touched, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there are thousands. I was
yeah.
looking the other day. I think Rome 2 alone has like 15,000, 12, something like
That's
that. Like
crazy.
crazy.
I
Yeah,
didn't even know
it's
that.
absolutely
Wow,
insane.
wow.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll
Great
take a look at
answers.
some of them. Thank you.
Nice. All right. So I'm gonna draw to a close. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. More of these are always going to be coming over the next few weeks. And I haven't mentioned this, but there is a link below in the video description to Thomas's YouTube channel. So go and check that out as well. Yeah, thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe, obviously, if you want to watch more like this. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Let me come on. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. See you guys.